and challenges for Sub-Saharan Africa. We have with us Holger Mati. He's from FAO, and he will make a presentation followed by discussion. I think we will give him 10 to 15 minutes.
I'll try.
Yeah.
I'll try to be quick.
Yeah. Okay. Welcome, Holger. Okay, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry we cut your lunch break short a little bit, but we very much appreciate you coming here. Also, thank you to the organizers for making room in their very tight agenda to let me present the outlook here to you, because we're very much interested to disseminate this work also to an African audience. Let me quickly provide some background on what we're doing. You may have seen the outlook, and sometimes it's called a forecast, but it's not a forecast. It's a consensus analysis on the future evolution of international commodity markets. And the main publication, and that's the one we're showing here today, is the annual OECD-FAO Agricultural Outlook, which FAO and OECD, together with a whole bunch of other experts, provide. And from that, we also provide scenario analysis, sort of what-if type of emerging market and policy issues using the underlying simulation model. So the publication has been around for 12 years now, and you may have seen it in the previous editions. It provides an outlook for 10 years into the future. It is model-based, but it's a consensus where a lot of layers of review of experts shape the baseline projections. And it covers the major temperate climate commodities: cereals, oilseeds, meats, dairy products, roots and tubers, cotton, and also biofuel. And there are satellite models for fish, and now we have a sister publication that covers cash crops, fruits, fibers, and beverages. The coverage is global in a sense that each and every country of the FAO member country is entered there, not all of them individually. We have about 40 countries individually, the major countries in global agricultural markets, and the remaining ones are aggregated in 10 regional aggregates. Africa currently in this publication has 10 countries singled out, and the remaining ones are in 3 regional aggregates. As it was mentioned already, this publication has a special theme chapter, which this year deals with Sub-Saharan Africa. In previous years, it was on China, India, and Brazil, and this year we looked at Africa. Now, such a projection needs macroeconomic assumptions, and these are the main macroeconomic assumptions. Let me summarize them very briefly in the interest of time. So we assume that population growth will be slowing down about 1% per annum with strong regional differences. So Africa is still about 2.5%. Economic growth in the world slow in the industrialized, very diverse in the emerging economy, like China and India, 6-7%, Russia, Brazil, only 1 and 2%. The least developed countries are suffering a bit from lower commodity prices, but are still assumed with a healthy growth of 5-6%. Crude oil prices important, and the US dollar is appreciating over the period. Now, these lead us to a couple of major consumption trends. And so the further evolution of income and urbanization and preferences lead to a strong demand growth for meat, fish, and dairy products. So the red line that you see there is the population growth, about 12% over the next 10 years. Anything above means there's growth on a per capita basis. So one thing, growth for meat and dairy. products. On the other hand, cereals, hardly any growth for food on a per capita basis, only in very low-income countries. But the thing to remember there is that now the demand for feed for cereals is the driver in the coming decade, because we need to feed the animals to provide dairy and meat. And the third fact is really the strong growth in vegetable oil and sugar. On one hand, that helped to bring people out of undernourishment, but on the other hand, this also leads to obesity and health concerns in more and more countries. Now, quickly over to the production side, and the main message I want to convey here is that the bulk of the production to respond to this demand that we just showed will come from intensification and efficiency gains. About 80% should be satisfied through that, and 20% through enlargement of the base, meaning the area or the herd size. The area that we think will come mainly in the Americas, in Brazil, and mainly for soybeans, again, to feed the animals. And in Africa, we think about 9 million hectares might be added in the next decade, mainly for cereals. There's still yield gaps between countries. They slowly close, but they remain a concern. Looking at these supply and demand conditions, bringing them together and looking at fundamental market prices, we've concluded that there is reason to believe that they will be stable over the next decade. No major constraints that need a higher price. Meat and dairy prices may be increasing a little bit because of the stronger demand. One thing to point out is that on the left-hand side, the actual prices are fluctuating a lot, and then the ones on the right-hand side, the ones we're projecting, are fairly flat. That does not mean we think they will be flat. We just have assumed away all the variability, like the weather, to go to the market fundamentals. But of course, we can bring this all back and solve this model 1,000 times to get all kinds of conditions built in, and then we can look at the variability from oil prices, economic growth, exchange rates, yield variations, and this would lead us to this kind of band. The darker the area, the higher the probability, and you see where within 80% probability the prices may lie if we bring back the variability from the past. Of course, climate change and policies may induce further variability. One quick look at the trade situation, and there are two messages. Really, the global export will be highly concentrated. 4 or 5 countries really dominate the trade for many commodities, and the Americas are here really the dominant ones. I'll save to go into the details here because the time. And the other side is because trade is more and more important for more and more people for their food security, especially in Africa and the Near East, because here, what we've plotted here is the consumption on the horizontal, the production on the vertical. If you're on the right-hand side, you have a deficit, and you see for most commodities, this region will have an increasing deficit over the next 10 years, relying on more and more trade. Now, let me skip the summary and move on to maybe the last point. We need to do, so from looking at all of this, means we need to do more to reach the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And that's why, because Africa is such an important region for these development goals, we want to have a better understanding of the region, and we tried to develop an analytical tool that allows us to better analyze the situation in Africa. And let me also skip that one. So what we've done here is to provide a regional outlook model for sub-Saharan Africa. So we went from the 10 countries to 3 regions to 42 fully endogenous modules and 5 simplified ones. In the book, then, because the chapter only has about 30 pages, we re-aggregated it and reported it in 4 regions. But the data is fully available, and we offer it to anybody who is interested to look at the country outlook and to do further analysis and work with us, because we really need the feedback from the experts in the region. So I'll show a couple of selected results. The chapter themselves is a write-up of the situation in the region, which is a literature review, and that's the literature that you have actually written, so I don't need to report that back to you. So I will just focus on the results that we themselves have developed. And the summary here is in a very broad aggregation of all the commodities that we cover. We've estimated that the total agriculture production is expanding about 2.6% a year. And the good news is that an increasing share will come from improved productivity. While in the past it was more expansion, now we think there is reason to believe that improved productivity will be the major driver. The growth in food demand is estimated at just over 3% a year, driven by population growth and leaving the per capita gains modest, as you can see in the bar diagram there. As I showed in the other diagram, that increasing gap leaves more needs for import, especially for vegetable oils, poultry meat, and sugar. Now, just to kind of give you an impression a little bit of sort of the type of analysis we've provided here, I plotted the per capita food demand in sub-Saharan Africa in the 4 regions, separated into vegetable and animal food, and then for comparison on the right-hand side, the developing countries in Asia-Pacific region and the Latin America region to provide a global context. And the left bar for each region is the base period, and the right bar is the target year 2025. And on the top is the calorie intake per day. And so the first one is Central Africa, Eastern Africa, Southern Africa, and Western Africa. And you see that Southern and Western Africa clearly kind of are higher than the other 2, and they are on par with what's going on like in Asia Pacific and Latin America, while we saw good growth in Eastern Africa percentage-wise, but more stagnation in Central Africa. The bottom one aggregates all the protein intake, another important indicator for nutrition, and there Southern Africa clearly stands out, is about the same composition of the diets as the Asia Pacific, while the other regions have a different diet composition with lower protein intake. We can also look at this from a commodity point of view, and I just wanted to show you one commodity here, maize, where plotted here production, consumption, and the net trade. And the message here that the region remains self-sufficient for the next 10 years with a net trade of 0 with the outside of the region. And just to give you a visual impression and just to show sort of how far we've disaggregated this shows the production and consumption in the base year and the target year for all the countries that we've covered here. And so now we could go into and discuss why this country is higher, this country is lower. Also the trade on the top chart, and the one on the bottom is the share of self-sufficiency. So if it's below, then some countries have 100% import. And there, especially what this is useful for is then you can take this model and say, well, what if we implement this or that measure? We've heard in the discussions here a lot of proposals, what could be done, what should be done, and you could implement this and then say, what will it do in this and that? So type of the what-if framework that we're providing. So the Africa model was really a very complex undertaking, and the database is critical. So I'd like to, ask everybody who is in data gathering, data reporting, to get, do the reporting to the UN very diligently, because this is really the base for this work. Because we want to provide an analytical framework as the basis for discussion. And we need further refinement of these models and the process in collaboration with our national partners. And my very last, just 2 key messages, and I think they're very much in line with everything that's been discussed here in the last 2 days. First, I didn't talk much about the eradication of hunger, but we've estimated that staying on the status quo will leave about 600 million people hungry by 2030, which is a far cry from the zero hunger target that the Sustainable Development Goals have set. And also what's been talked about over and over again here is that we need a holistic approach that recognizes the interlinkages between rural poverty, food security, nutrition, sustainable agriculture, healthy ecosystems, and climate change. And we're trying to work with all of you, and our specific contribution is to provide an analytical framework to frame the discussion, so that by getting some knowledge about what might happen in the future, we're better able to make good decisions today. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention. All of this can be downloaded from our website. And for any specific questions that go beyond what can be resolved today, I'll be happy to receive your emails. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Holger. This is a report, the OECD-FAO Outlook 2016-2025. And thanks to Holger for presenting this report to us. To do justice to the work he has presented, I would like to open the floor for questions, but no more than 5 questions. Any question or comment? Yes, please.
My name is Tim Williams. I work for the International Water Management Institute. Thank you for the presentation. Obviously, the outlook is based on certain assumptions, and you said it goes from 19 to 10 years time. When you look at some of those assumptions, even the one on the oil price, it's suddenly that events have overtaken that. So my question really is, to what extent can you quickly run the model to take into account changes in some of the variables that you've assumed will remain in a certain range over time?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, and that is really actually the strength of this type of model, that changes in the assumptions can be implemented very, very quickly. So as I said, we start out with the assumptions that are plausible today, the most plausible projections of the oil price, but then it can change through any type of economic or political events or natural catastrophes, and then we can change the assumptions and run a new solution and then report the percentage changes that this would cause. And then also in sort of a second round, people can say, okay, this is our response to this, and then we say, okay, this political instrument will combat the effects, and then we can check out, is it effective or is it not effective? And this type of analysis is really the strength. I mean, the baseline is the first step, and it is an important step, but that could be done with a spreadsheet. To have a model with 60,000 equations is really there to do this type of analysis that you were just asking about. Yes.
Thank you. I have some questions. One is on the I found the presentation a little bit pessimistic about Africa's production in agriculture, because you're saying the production will come mostly from Brazil, America to match the increase in demand. So don't you see, because in the same time we hear a lot that Africa has more land available for agriculture production, and there are some here around the FGB and all those agencies putting for more investment in agriculture and etc. So are you pessimistic about the future of agriculture in Africa? I'm being a little bit provocative here. And second one, I saw your fun chart and I find it a little bit small, not very large, the fun chart of the the prices projections. I wonder whether I know that you were picking the variance from the past, but if you go too long in the past, you may not pick the recent period where you have more events, more variance in climate change shocks or food prices shocks, etc. So I wonder whether there you are not too optimistic in the other way around. And I'm a little bit also, last question, surprised by the impact of population growth, which seems to me, I'm not a specialist of it, but it seems to me the impact is not so high, while we are often told Africa will, double its population by 2050. So I would see, starting from 2025 or 30, a more increase in demand. And I mean, your number is 2.5, which seems quite reasonable. Maybe I'm wrong. Thanks.
Well, in relation to your first question, I think the report says food demand per capita is expected to grow at a higher rate than food output grows per capita. So that means Africa will continue to import food, and the food import bill will continue to grow. That is very important. Yeah. Yes, Ayo?
Actually, my question is building on where you just landed, that if the food production is going by 2.6% and the food consumption is going by 3%, meaning the objective set for this particular conference looks like a mirage, because you cannot even meet immediate consumption not to serve as raw materials into industry. And on the basis of that, I tend to raise a poser in terms of what are the specific policy to really accelerate production, because that will be something that will be quite policy oriented in terms of what African government will need to focus attention on. And as a result of that, we will need those things, that because the objective is for us to save what we'll be using for import for other developmental works. In fact, we can use it to even further develop agriculture. So that's one. It will be good for us to have some specific policy anchor for this particular issue. Now, the second one, relates to your conclusions. We need some kind of holistic approach in making sure that we merge rural poverty with issue of agricultural productivity, with health, with education, with climate change. Now, I'm quite amazed about that, because that's exactly what the SDG is all about. But the main question is, do you have a kind of analysis that tells you the linkages across all those issues in the report, in terms of what are the determinants of poverty, what are the determinants of agricultural productivity, what are the what is the role of the impact of climate change on agricultural productivity, as well as others? Because if you don't establish the linkage, it will be difficult for us to have a kind of holistic policy issues that will be able to address those issues at a go. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comments and questions. So what we have done here is really to, in a probably simplistic and very simplified way, as a starting point, to look at past trends and the exogenous projections that we were provided by the World Bank and the IMF to use this framework to project the production forward, without making any sort of value judgment. Is it pessimistic? Is it optimistic? Really just from a very neutral and objective point of view, to see what was coming out, and then we shared it with a range of experts mainly in Southern Africa. The range of feedback was very limited, and that's part of the reason that while I'm here today, to sort of show, okay, we need more feedback, more discussion on this. So that was the consensus in terms of the production outlook. In terms of the stochastics, yes, that's an econometric exercise that, yes, can be done in various ways. The methodology that we've used focuses, yes, on past variability, and you're right, we're always told future variability will be different, but nobody's willing to make a quantitative assessment of what really is the change. How many more severe events will we have? Everybody says, yes, we have a higher incidence of severe events, but is it, how many are they? And it's very difficult. So to take the guesswork out of it, we kind of left it with analyzing past variability. And I very much appreciate your comments, and I'm almost flattered that we could do things that you propose, but what we're doing is really providing a small, or we're trying to provide a small contribution to this very large debate that you mentioned. And our task is not covering all these things, but we're contributing to this debate, and then we try to work with our colleagues who look into climate change, who look into, we have a department on social protection and rural poverty, and these people look at the market data and they feed them in their model, and we hope to build sort of a network that in the sum of all the research and all the reports, then we can get a more comprehensive picture. We ourselves, we're very much focused on agriculture markets and providing solid data and an analysis tool on that market to feed into that debate.
Thank you, Holger. Let us give him a round of applause. And it is time to move to the next session. Over to you, Professor Olu Ajikaya.
Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are moving smoothly to the next, presentation of reports. This afternoon is about reports. great work going on in various institutions. This one is about the ECA. ECA, as you know, is the think tank for Africa to support Africa in our quest for development. And annually, they have flagship publication they always produce, which is called Economic Report on Africa. And each report has a theme. So the theme for this year's report is, greening Africa's industrialization. And I think the theme cannot be more apt, having regard to all the issues and the initiatives that we are already having on the continent and also at the global level. So I'd like to first of all congratulate the leadership and staff of ECA for this very pertinent report. To share the highlights of the report with us, we have the leadership of the whole process itself, and that's my very good friend. As I also call him my boss, because we have had a lot of opportunities to work together on this type of issues in the past. So, Dr. Adam Elharika, please, can you take your seat? I will momentarily invite you to now come and please share the highlights of the report with us. As soon as it finishes, we will then again do like we did in the last session, which is to throw it open for your own input, comments, suggestions for this, and then also for future, initiatives that I'm sure the ECA would like to take on board. So without further ado, let me invite Adam to kindly share with us highlights of the report, and then we go to the next set of the presentation, of the questions and answers. So over to you, please.
Okay, good afternoon. I think I can assume that you are all familiar now with ECA work on industrialization. Immediately after the 2008-2009 economic and financial crisis, we in ECA had intense discussion on the way forward for Africa to promote sustainable development. And we agreed that Africa should focus on promoting structural transformation as a priority, and that industrialization is the best pathway for Africa to promote structural transformation. And since then, we started to work on industrialization as a core development policy. We know that we have a sister organization, UNIDO, that works on industrialization. But we were not satisfied with UNIDO's sectoral approach to industrialization. For us, industrialization, value addition, promoting value chains should be a central policy objective for Africa and not a sectoral policy objective. So we produced a number of reports on industrialization and the role of the state, development planning, and what it takes for African countries to promote industrialization. The previous reports were summarized by Professor Hajun of Cambridge University in a book commissioned by ECA called Transformative Industrial Policy in Africa. So this book summarizes all the previous work ECA had done in the area with some reflections by Hajun himself. And I think this is a must-to-read book if you want to work on industrialization in Africa. The book we want to launch today is on greening Africa's industrialization. We know that we have a lot of opportunities in promoting commodity-based industrialization. And then we questioned, we had to question the effectiveness of industrial policy used by African countries. So we have a separate publication on that. And then we looked at the issue of trade in promoting industrialization in Africa. But the last question we looked at was how to green Africa's industrialization. And I will go through the report very quickly, focusing on the thematic part of the report. Normally the report starts with an analysis of recent social and economic developments on the continent, but I'll move to the thematic part, which focuses on greening Africa's industrialization. As we all know, Africa continues to grow despite strong global headwinds, and there is a steady progress in social development. But we all know that more needs to be done for the continent to achieve its social and economic development objectives, and structural transformation is a priority, and industrialization, as I said, is the best pathway for Africa to achieve structural transformation as articulated in the SDGs. And by the way, the work we have done over the years really helped us to influence the SDGs and other global development agendas. Governments are central in mapping out the pathway to green industrialization. This is a message we have repeated several times. Governments have a role to play. Now, towards and to promote Africa's development agenda in the context of Agenda 2063 and the SDGs, with the mantra of leaving no one behind, structural transformation is a must for us. And industrialization, particularly commodity-based industrialization, is the engine for achieving structural transformation. Now, we in this report present a case for resource-efficient growth that is green and that is also inclusive. Now, what do we mean by green industrialization? Simply defined, green industrialization is about decoupling growth from resource use and pollution. There is partial decoupling and complete decoupling. If you are able to use the same amount of resources, for example, energy resources, to produce more output, that is partial decoupling. If you are able to use less energy input to produce more output, that is complete decoupling. And the graph shows the trajectory of decoupling which we use to define. Now, green industrialization brings in industrialization, green growth, and inclusive growth objectives under one objective, that is green industrialization. Why do we need to green our industries? The reasons are many, and I'm sure you all know. I'm not going to spend much time on this. Safeguarding environment, benefiting from resource efficiency, and going further to develop agenda of greening, diversification for structural transformation, and to gain latitude to configure and strengthen institutions that will support our sustainable development. And decisions today, as you know, will have profound influence on decisions tomorrow. Why greening Africa's industrialization now? Now is the time. Some people will say Africa contributes little to climate change. Why should we worry about it? And we believe that we should worry about it right now for a variety of reasons. As the global environment is right with the signing of the Paris Agreement December last year and the Marrakesh COP21 this year, and Africa as a latecomer. We do not have to really use, for example, traditional sources of energy while there are opportunities for us to leapfrog. So we should build on these opportunities and to gain greater control and ownership of development agenda, plug into the global economy, increasing demand for green products, and increase productivity and job creation. These are among the factors. Africa has minimum contribution to climate change globally, but now is the time for Africa to green its growth. So what does it take to green? We need to change, we need really holistic changes. Marginal changes will not help us. We need to do bold leadership, to have bold leadership that will help us create an enabling environment and need incentives as well as capacities for us to green our growth and industrialization. Now the question is, which sectors can we start with to green our industries? Here the report looks at 6 sectors: production sectors, extractive sectors, agro-industries, manufacturing, and the enabling sectors, energy, water, and transport. And greening can be done using value chains as entry points for decoupling. The greening approach starts with developing a green industrialization vision, translating the vision into strategy, and ensuring that policies are joined up and involves a full range of stakeholders, private sector, civil society, and so on. So we started, the book starts with a scenario analysis, business as usual, and as a resource efficient path. And clearly, analysis shows that in greening Africa's industrialization brings more benefits than business as usual. If you look at this graph with the analysis using data from Kenya, green growth over the long term, although business as usual might be beneficial in the short term, in the long term, greening growth will ensure that Africa will grow at higher and more sustainable rates. That's the green line in this graph. We collected data and information from 14 countries to look at experiences in green industries across Africa. And I am really happy to share with these experiences which reflect a lot of progress done by African countries. I will not have time to go into details, but we have agribusinesses in Cote d'Ivoire and bioethanol in Malawi, and we have South African renewable energy, and we have experiences from Mauritius, blue economy, and light manufacturing in Ethiopia. All these experiences show that with little interventions, cost-effective interventions, and incentives by governments, and involvement of the private sector, we can produce green products at lower cost and promote industries that can really change the landscape throughout the country. I'd like to invite you to read these case studies. But these case studies, for example, show that in South Africa, green strategies helped governments not only to produce more output, help some enterprises produce more output at lower cost, at lower energy cost, but also to create more jobs. So what are the motivations for private industries in particular to work on green products? The motivations at plant level are: one, strategic long-term survival of the business. We know that there is a growing market for green products now, and there is a growing movement and mobilization and awareness. So businesses want to be in the market of the future, not in the market of yesterday. And also there is a need to drive down cost and to comply with environmental legislations, and to meet customer needs and improve performance relative to other companies. Also, good relations with community are part of the motivation. Mr. Chairman, I know we are short of time, so let me go straight to conclusions and policy recommendations for African countries to promote green industrialization. We see that there are gains in regional business environment and increased economic and political stability across the continent. And commodity price developments highlight the need for prudent and counter-cyclical macroeconomic management, but we should not lose sight as far as the future is concerned. We should remain focused on Africa's long-term development while we address short-term macroeconomic challenges. So there are opportunities for Africa to promote green industrialization by building platforms for shared learning on green industries, and to develop innovative financial instruments to mobilize resources for green industrialization. Africa also needs to play a more decisive role in global governance and negotiations on trade and climate change. So, to start with, we need to have the strategy. We need to have the vision, plan, strategies, and to provide the resources, the capacity needed to implement these strategies for green growth. But green growth, in short, is possible and beneficial. Thank you. Which is available outside.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam. The book is not only available in hard copy, but also online, right? Yeah. So you can visit, the ECA website and download the reports very easily. Now, this will be a two-in-one, presentation. The second is going to be presented by William Davis, also of ECA, and is on targeting agro-allied industrialization in Africa, the instrumentality of Continental Free Trade Area. This is a shorter, presentation than the first one, and we therefore give you 7 minutes maximum. Okay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As I'm sure you're all aware, the African Continental Free Trade Area is currently being negotiated by the various negotiating fora, and the negotiations are expected to be concluded by the end of next year. So this is really a live issue. The Continental Free Trade Area has the potential to significantly add to Africa's industrial sector and to speed the continent's transformation. But there are a number of details that I'm going to run through in my presentation. So let's get started. I'm going to skip over a couple of slides because because of the time constraints. Let me focus on this slide first. So this slide is about the imperative of focusing on increasing intra-African trade as a pathway to economic transformation and industrialization. So the first paragraph in the slide makes the point that the multilateral trading system and Africa's trading relations with other regions outside of the continent have not really delivered transformation for Africa. The WTO is deadlocked, and the level of ambition seems to have even the level of ambition seems to have fallen based on the last ministerial conference. Africa's preferential trade agreements or preferential trade schemes with other regions, while they have contributed to Africa's economic output, they haven't really contributed to economic transformation and industrialization. Africa is also facing the end of the commodity super cycle at a global level. However, intra-African trade presents an opportunity to accelerate the rate of transformation. So as you can see from the graphic here, between 2000 and 2014, intra-African exports were the fastest growth market for Africa's exports in the non-extractives, and this is especially the case in processed and value-added exports. However, there are a number of barriers to intra-African trade that need to be addressed if this opportunity is going to be seized. So, for example, only 9% of Africa's total trade in goods is within the continent. That figure may look a little different to others that you've seen. It's because of a slightly different methodology. But we use a similar methodology for Asia as a region, and there the comparable figure is 43%. So Africa can go a lot further. This can be explained by the fact that intra-African average applied tariff protection is still high, particularly between the various regional economic communities. So average applied tariff protection within Africa is 8.7% against 2.5% with the rest of the world. And it's 9% for industrial products. Non-tariff barriers remain high, and so the average African country ranks in the worst performing 25% of all emerging and developing countries in terms of costs of border processing and document requirements based on the World Bank's Doing Business indicator. There's also been limited progress in harmonizing product standards and regulations in Africa. So this slide shows the timeline of the CFTA negotiations, but I think we can skip over it in the interests of time. As you can see from this slide, this shows some of the results of ECA's modeling work on the potential impacts of the Continental Free Trade Area on Africa. And you can see that there's a very large increase in intra-African trade as a result of the CFTA, particularly if combined with trade facilitation, and particularly in the industrial sector, which is represented by the yellow part of the stacked graph. Other institutions doing this kind of work have found similar results. So these slides show that the mega regional trade agreements being discussed, although they're hitting some roadblocks, if they were implemented, it would make it all the more important for Africa to implement the CFTA, because this would undo the expected negative effects on Africa of the mega regional trade agreements. Similarly, this is also the case with the economic partnership agreements and their expected negative effects on intra-African trade. The CFTA has been shown through this modeling work to remedy that. This shows the upcoming timetable for negotiations until the end of the year. I think we can skip over that. It's also important to emphasize that the CFTA by itself is not going to suffice to seize these opportunities of structural transformation through intra-African trade. We already noted the importance of trade facilitation in seizing this opportunity, but as you can see from the Boosting Intra-African Trade Action Plan clusters, there are a number of other areas also in the column on the right-hand side. In addition, it will be important to make sure that particular vulnerable communities are not left behind by the CFTA. ECA is currently conducting an ex-ante human rights impact assessment of the CFTA on food security, livelihoods and employment, together with the UN Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung. And it shows the risks to vulnerable communities of this and the need for complementary policies to ensure that these vulnerable communities are not left without a livelihood by the CFTA, and possibly a cautious approach to liberalization commitments in certain areas. I think we've covered most of this slide already, so let me bring this presentation to a close. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Davis, for this rapid presentation. I'm sorry we had to rush because we don't want to miss the session for the concurrent session, which our colleagues will actually share their research work with us. So now we have got these two reports. Can this also be downloaded on the website?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So you can access the report in its full form from ACA website. Now it's time for discussion, and since we don't have too much time, let's limit the questions to not more than 1 minute each, so that we can have quite a bit of time for many contributions. So the floor is open. Here's the roving. Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Amarkwan from UNDP. My assumption is that when you're greening industries, we have to forego productivity in the short to medium term at least, but you gain in terms of sustainability in the long run. In a very long term time horizon, you may gain, but not necessarily in the short to medium term. But I assume in the graph you presented, that may be reflected where you have the potential growth, but when you green, it may be a little lower. At the same time, you may gain in terms of reducing pollution. But my question then is, there was another slide saying your productivity increases. Does it reflect the long-term time horizon or short to immediate gains? If not, whether the report has taken into consideration how to address the negative implications of this productivity loss on, say, employment, all aspects of economic consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next. Okay. Yes. Oh, sorry. Next. No, let's take the next one here. Ayo, right? And then I come back.
All right. Thank you. My name is Ayo Dishola, also from UNDP. Well, the two reports are quite interesting, and they've opened up a lot of issues that are quite relevant for policies in Africa. And on the first one, I think I would like to learn from where Maraku ended. The issue is one that just two quick comments on that. It would be good for us to really know how countries are really implementing the economic impact assessment and the environmental impact assessment of some of the impact of these manufacturing or industrial setups. I think it would be good because I know many of our countries have EIA, but nobody follows up in terms of how genuine is their implementation, because it has a lot of implications on greening the economy. Two, it is clear that green growth has trade-offs with some fundamental development objectives, like poverty, inequality, as well as employment. How do we manage these trade-offs, especially in the short and medium term? And that's why it lands on where Amarakun ended. And on Davies, on Williams' presentation, this is great. But my knowledge of the African economy is that there is hardly any single country in Africa that doesn't have series of bilateral trade agreements with the rest of the world that have tied their hands like this. So how Continental Free Trade Agreement is going to work, I'm still looking at that. Because unless we examine our bilateral agreements and see what are the ones that are likely to impinge us in making progress on the Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think this is one of the areas we have to. It may be the further areas of research for ECA and other agencies. We need to look at that, because unless we address that, I'm saying this because I know of few countries, for instance, that they cannot export a particular product to any other country in the world except it lands in one particular country. So you may not know. So, but what I'm saying is, and it's not only those countries, but it affects all our countries. Let's try to see what will be the implications of existing trade agreement, bilateral agreements on the implementation of this. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name again is Ondonet Diwa, Managing Partner of Strategic Resources Limited. Talking about greening Africa's industrialization, a wonderful presentation. Quickly, I want to hinge it mainly on the need for bold leadership in Africa. Bold leadership, as it was stressed. Now, other collateral investments that are not directly related but impacting are issues of deepening the knowledge, especially the massification of knowledge in Africa. Because you can't sell the issue of greening an economy to a people that are lackluster in the area of knowledge. Huge investments are needed for knowledge, for a knowledge economy in Africa. As we could see, Southeastern Asian countries leapfrogged their development because of huge investment in education. Now, Africa has a dearth of capital to invest, whereas there's abundance of capital in the Northern Hemisphere. If we are appealing to the benevolence of the Northern Hemisphere countries rather than to their exigency, to their need, if we have to let them understand that it is in shared global interest that they release their funds to invest in the critical sectors of knowledge and infrastructure in Africa, because it will impact on the overall development as far as greening is concerned, and the whole world will be the better for it. How do we bring this into sync with what we're saying? Now, in the aspect of...
make it brief.
Yeah, of African trade, also the same issues. Most of the flights here must originate and go to some metropoles, and come back, and Africa doesn't even have a hub. Now, how do we take care of all these things? Thank you very much.
Very much. No interest on this side? Okay, then I come back to my promise.
Thank you. Just quickly on economic integration and free trade. I wonder really what is the optimal strategy to reach this Continental Free Trade Agreement, when we see that there are actually many communities, and within those communities there is already some free trade agreement, one in SADC, at least it's normally working on goods but not on services yet, and they are negotiating the tripartite free trade agreement between SADC, COMESA and EEC. So really, how is it working? What is the best strategy? And second, you mentioned very quickly the impact of EPA, and we wonder how much this is factored in those three free trade agreements, and should we appeal for a kind of pause in the implementation of EPA. In some regions, it has to start by 2020. Is it too early? What are your assessment and analysis on this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more? Okay, very good. So I think we can now return to the presenters, beginning with Adam.
Thanks. I think the questions on the cost of greening. I think you will be surprised if you read the case studies presented in this book. You know, because of technology, the cost of greening is really declining and the benefits are increasing very fast. For example, you know, Morocco today produces 20% of its national energy using solar energy. It's green, clean energy sources. And who is benefiting most from these clean energy sources? It's the poor. So the benefits are spreading across the country, and companies that are involved in promoting green energy are benefiting, creating a lot of jobs. We have a number of examples here related to, for example, water management in leather industry in Uganda, where individual leather companies were able to save about 20% of the cost of water, on the cost of water alone. So new technology is making life very easy. The cost of greening is not like before. There are some green industries that really make a lot of profit even in the short run. So it's not just long run. The calculation we made for the scenario, for the alternative scenarios, business as usual, and greening starts from today. And we have to start from today to green because the technology is here. Another example is also water management and brewery industry in Ghana. You will find details on this where breweries were able to also reduce cost and make a lot of profit. So the change in technology is real and the gains are huge. So we cannot wait. Let us make Africa green right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, yes, William.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me take the questions one by one in the order in which they were made. So first, Sir, our colleague from UNDP. I wasn't aware these kinds of bilateral trade agreements that specify that a country can only export a certain product to a particular partner. They shouldn't result in a legal conflict for the CFTA, thankfully. This is because even though there may be obligations for a country to supply a particular product to another third country, the lowering of intra-African tariffs or restrictions on trade and services won't cause a direct legal conflict with that. It will simply mean that the country whose exports are restricted won't be able to take advantage of the new preferences that they have within Africa. If there are such agreements that exist between two African countries, the CFTA template, as it stands now, is going to phase all of those out, except for those that are customs unions, in order to bring coherence to the African market and make sure that African firms don't have to comply with a number of different sets of rules of origin, a number of different trading regimes. I mentioned a CFTA template that I should just clarify a little bit. at the last meeting of the heads of the AU Assembly of Heads of State and Government in Kigali in July, they requested the African Union Commission to produce a template text to support the CFTA negotiations. We've been working with AUC and UNCTAD in putting together that template, which is now being translated and will be circulated to member states as soon as the translation is complete. So let me move to the next question, which was regarding the Intra-African flight network. And so I agree with you. I think the history of efforts to create one African sky have been littered with frustration. The Yamoussoukro decision, the Yamoussoukro declaration, the difficulties of getting those implemented. The CFTA represents a further opportunity to do this because trade in services is also part of what's being negotiated. But we will see whether the sensitivities that blocked progress in the past will also frustrate it again. Finally, sir, your question about what the best strategy is to proceed with the CFTA. Regarding the existence of RECs that have free trade areas already, so I suppose what you're concerned about is that members of those RECs won't be interested in pushing forward the CFTA because because they want to preserve existing institutions, etc. So my boss was at the last AU summit in Kigali. He sat in the room when the heads of state discussed the CFTA negotiations, and it was clear that there is political will at the very highest level of government. So that should encourage us that African countries want to go beyond the regional economic communities and continentalize the integration process. In addition, I mean, it would seem to make no sense that the continent's largest economies, Nigeria and South Africa, still trade on a most favored nation basis, and there's no preferential trade agreement that links them. And I think that's everything. I hope I've addressed all of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William. I think we've had very interesting presentations, very interesting comments on the greening the process of industrializing Africa. I was wondering if the report has suggestions for us as to how to escape the intellectual property constraints on technology flows to our part of the world. We may do the best with the stock of technology we have now, but since the advanced countries are far ahead in terms of producing green technologies, but because they are produced by private entities, they have IP constraints imposed on them. I'm hoping that the ECA will help to raise these constraints so that the technology that we need to actually green our industries and the process of industrializing Africa will be relaxed consciously, apart from flow of money from them to help build our own local capacity to actually produce knowledge and technologies. We can pluck technologies already available, but then the ease of plucking it is this problem of IP. I'm hoping that the ECA will help us, draw attention to this so that we can include it in the negotiations. That look, yes, Paris Declaration is there, but for us to be able to do what we have committed to, you also have to relax a number of constraints. Maybe their government need to buy up these IPs and therefore make them open source or whatever initiative that can be done in that regard. Otherwise, I think I'd like to thank you very, very much for the report, and then the report on addressing or targeting agro-allied industries on the continent using the CFTA framework. I didn't see how agro-allied actually featured in the report, but maybe it's there. So I'm sure when you pick it up, you'll be able to see. Otherwise, he's here. You can ask him. All right. So without further ado, since our time is up, let me thank you very much for your patience and your contributions, and let's give them a round of applause, please. Okay, I guess we can now move on to the concurrent sessions and then continue to engage ourselves. Thank you very much.